The city of Detroit had always been known for its grit. It was a city built on hard work, industry, and the unyielding spirit of its people. But amidst the motor factories and steel plants, there was one thing that had always united the city like no other: baseball. And at the heart of that love for the game stood the Detroit Tigers, a team as resilient and proud as the city it represented. For decades, the Tigers have been a symbol of hope for Detroit, especially during hard times, when the economy faltered, when factories closed their doors, when the streets grew quiet and uncertain. The Tigers gave the people something to rally around. Win or lose, the fans packed the stadium, wearing the team's iconic Old English tee, filling the air with the sounds of cheers, boos, and unwavering support. It was the summer of 2024, and the Tigers were in the middle of a season that had taken everyone by surprise. After years of rebuilding, after seasons where it seemed like hope was slipping away, something had clicked. The players had come together in a way no one had expected. There was talk in the locker room that this might just be their year. At the center of it all was Carlos "Rocket" Rodriguez, a fiery young pitcher who had become the face of the franchise. He had a fastball that seemed to defy the laws of physics, and his energy was contagious. But beyond his talent, Carlos embodied the fighting spirit of Detroit. Growing up in a small, run-down neighborhood just outside the city, he knew what it meant to struggle, to hustle for every opportunity. For him, playing for the Tigers wasn't just a career, it was a dream that connected him to the city he loved. That summer, Carlos was having a breakout season. The Tigers were winning games, climbing the standings, and suddenly, people were talking about playoffs. But Carlos knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The Tigers had a history of falling short, just when victory seemed within reach, and Carlos felt the weight of that history on his shoulders. He wasn't just pitching for himself, was pitching for the city of Detroit. As the season wore on, the Tigers found themselves in a heated battle for the division title. Their fiercest rivals, the Chicago White Sox, were right on their tail, and a 3-game series against them was set to take place in Comerica Park. The stakes couldn't be higher. A win here could cement the Tigers' path to the postseason, but a loss would put everything in jeopardy. The first 2 games of the series were split. The Tigers won a nail-biter in the opener, with Carlos throwing a near-flawless 8 innings. But the White Sox bounced back in Game 2, crushing the Tigers with a late-inning rally. Now, it all came down to Game 3, a Sunday afternoon showdown that would determine the Tigers' fate. The morning of the game, Detroit was buzzing. The streets were filled with fans, and Comerica Park was a sea of orange and blue. Families, kids, lifelong fans all gathered, hoping to see their team take one step closer to the playoffs. Carlos sat quietly in the locker room, headphones on, mentally preparing himself. He knew this game was more than just another start. It was his chance to prove that the Tigers could rise above their past, that they could be champions once again. When Carlos stepped onto the mound, the roar from the crowd was deafening. The pressure was immense, but he thrived on it. He threw each pitch with precision, his fastball slicing through the air like a bullet. The White Sox hitters, known for their power, struggled to make contact. Carlos struck out batter after batter, his confidence growing with each out. But the game remained tight. Both teams' defenses were sharp, and the score stayed locked at 0-0 through 7 innings. Every pitch, every play, felt like it could decide the game. The tension in the stadium was palpable. In the bottom of the 8th, with 2 out and a runner on second, Carlos took a deep breath. He knew this was likely his last inning, and he wanted to leave everything on the field. The batter was their toughest hitter, someone who had tormented the Tigers in past seasons. But Carlos didn't back down. He fired a blazing fastball, low and inside, and the batter swung miss. 2 more pitches, 2 more strikes. The crowd exploded as Carlos walked off the mound, having struck out the side. In the bottom of the 9th, with the game still tied, the Tigers had a chance to win it. The leadoff hitter slapped a single into left field, and the crowd jumped to its feet. The next batter laid down a perfect bunt, advancing the runner to second. With 1 out, the stage was set for the Tigers' hero of the season, Miguel Santiago, the team's veteran slugger. Miguel had been with the Tigers for years. Through the highs and the lows, he had seen seasons slip away, watched as the team rebuilt and restructured. But today, he had a chance to rewrite the script. On the first pitch, Miguel swung and connected, The ball soared into right field, deep, and as it sailed over the fence, Comerica Park erupted. A walk-off home run. The Tigers had won. The crowd went wild, hugging, cheering, and chanting, "Let's go Tigers!" The victory was more than just a game, it was a statement. Detroit was back. Carlos and his teammates rushed to the field, celebrating like never before. The season was far from over, but this win felt different. It felt like the turning point the Tigers had been waiting for. As the players high-fived and embraced, Carlos looked out at the fans, at the sea of people who had stuck with the Tigers through thick and thin. This was for them. This was for the city of Detroit. That night, as the lights dimmed over Comerica Park, Detroit roared louder than ever. The Tigers were on their way to the playoffs, but more importantly, they had reignited a city's belief in itself. Through every pitch, every hit, and every win, the Tigers showed that the heart of Detroit was still beating, strong, and that it would continue to roar for years to come. Carlos stood on the field long after the celebrations had ended, the bright lights of the stadium illuminating the empty seats. He could still hear the echoes of the cheering fans, see the faces of children in Tigers caps, and feel the pulse of the city around him. This was his home, and tonight, he had given something back to it. His teammates were already talking about the playoffs, about the challenges ahead. But for Carlos, this moment felt like a victory on its own. The playoffs would come, the games would get harder, and the pressure would only increase. But tonight, the Tigers had shown that they belonged to Detroit, a city that had seen its share of hard times, could still stand tall. As he left the field, walking through the dimly lit tunnel, Carlos felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew the road ahead was long, but he wasn't afraid. The roar of Detroit was behind him, and together, they would face whatever came next. In the distance, the city lights of Detroit shimmered, reflecting off the river like 1,000 little stars. The Tigers had reignited a flame that had never really gone out, just flickered, waiting for its moment to burn brightly once more. And as long as the Tigers played, as long as they fought with the same determination as their city, Detroit would continue to roar. This was just the beginning. Carlos reached the Tigers clubhouse, where the post-game celebrations were still going strong. Laughter, cheers, and high-fives filled the room as players toasted their hard-earned victory. But even amidst the excitement, there was a quiet understanding that this wasn't the final destination, just a pivotal step in a long journey. Miguel Santiago, the veteran slugger whose walk-off home run had sealed the game, stood with a knowing smile. He had been here before, seen the ups and downs, the heartbreaks and the triumphs. He clapped a hand on Carlos' shoulder. "You did good out there, kid," Miguel said, his voice steady, filled with pride. "But you know, this is just one game. There's more work to do." Carlos nodded, knowing Miguel was right, but still, there was something electric in there tonight. The Tigers were no longer just playing for themselves, they were playing for something much bigger. The city's pride, its fight, its relentless spirit, all of it was tied to the fate of the team, and after years of rebuilding, of being the underdog, they were finally on the cusp of something great. As the celebrations died down, Carlos stepped out of the clubhouse and into the cool night air. The stadium lights were still glowing softly, casting long shadows over the field where moments earlier the game had been decided. He breathed in deeply, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him like a warm blanket. He knew the challenges ahead would be immense, the playoffs would be grueling, and the competition would only get tougher. But Carlos wasn't worried. The Tigers had fought too hard for too long to back down now. The city of Detroit, too, had fought through its own hardships, through decades of economic downturns and struggles that had tested the resilience of its people. But just like its baseball team, Detroit had never given up. Tonight, as Carlos looked out at the skyline, he felt that same unshakable belief within himself. The Tigers' journey was far from over, and no matter what obstacles came their way, they would keep fighting, just like the city that had always stood by them. He could almost hear the heartbeat of Detroit, steady and strong, as if it pulsed in time with the footsteps of those heading home after the game. Tomorrow, the stadium would be quiet, the streets calm, but the roar of tonight's victory would carry through the city, a reminder of what was possible. Carlos knew, deep in his heart, that this was more than a season, it was a movement, a new era for Detroit, and whether or not they won it all, The Tigers had already accomplished something far greater. They had given the city hope. As he walked away from the stadium, the lights behind him flickering out, Carlos Kane knew that the story of the 2024 Detroit Tigers was far from finished. The playoffs awaited, the biggest stage of them all, but no matter the outcome, the Tigers and the city they represented would keep roaring, louder than ever before. And that roar, the roar of Detroit, would echo through the ages. As the night settled in, and the crowds slowly dispersed from Comerica Park, the energy in the air lingered, thick with hope and excitement. The victory wasn't just about baseball anymore. It was about Detroit, its resilience, its fight, its ability to rise again after being knocked down time and time again.